Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well and staying safe at home. Thank you so much for tuning into our first webinar. My name is Annika Darwa. I'm 15 years old. I'm currently studying in grade 10 in Cheltenham Ladies College in the UK. I was diagnosed with celiac disease at 9 years old and founded Gluten Free Jio last year, a platform which is dedicated to providing access to information regarding celiac disease and living a gluten-free lifestyle in India. Today, we are lucky enough to have with us Dr. Rajendra P. Setty. Dr. Rajendra Setty is a senior consultant pediatric gastroenterologist at Paras Bliss Hospital, Panchkula, and holds an advanced degree in pediatric gastroenterology from Montefiore Children's Hospital in New York. With over 25 years of rich experience, Dr. Setty moves to India after being director of the Department of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Hepatology at Cooper Children's Hospital in New Jersey. He has shown excellence as a teacher, clinician, and administrator, and has won many awards for his service. Dr. Setty has numerous publications around pediatric gastroenterology and hepatology in journals of national and international repute, and believes in standardized medical care for all. As I mentioned earlier, Gluten Free Jio is a social project that seeks to increase awareness and access to information on celiac disease and living a gluten-free lifestyle in India. Our mission is to create awareness by conducting information sessions in schools, to promote testing and diagnosis for families from diverse backgrounds in partnership with local diagnostic facilities, and to provide resources, tips, and materials to help celiacs lead a healthy gluten-free lifestyle. We've conducted educational workshops across different schools in Chandigarh, and we've also been recognized by the Mayor of Chandigarh, who attended and recognized Gluten Free Jio for its work. We've developed free educational resources, including a children's book, blog, and educational videos to promote further understanding and give access to information. Gluten Free Jio now has a community of over 10,000 followers on social media. We're currently working on developing an app to increase access to gluten-free resources like restaurants serving gluten-free food, grocery stores which carry gluten-free supplies, allowing individuals to lead a healthy gluten-free life. And now, what we're all here for today, demystifying celiac disease. Thank you so much, Dr. Setty, for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure, Annika. Thank you for inviting me.
To begin by asking you, how would you explain celiac disease to a layman?
Well, celiac disease, basically everybody understands it as it's being a wheat allergy. But actually, there's a substance within the wheat molecule, a protein called gluten, that causes the problem. So the unfortunate thing is you cannot take the gluten out of the wheat molecule. So you have to stop eating all wheat.
So personally, it took a long time for me to get correctly diagnosed with celiac disease. I was misdiagnosed with other illnesses such as typhoid, and it was probably due to a constant temperature and fever that kept reappearing every few months. In actuality, my body's immune system was just compromised due to the gluten in my diet. So as a doctor, how do you diagnose celiac disease? And also, having worked in India and the US, do you feel there's a difference in the approach to the diagnosis by doctors?
Well, sure. So the biggest thing that in India is that people thought that it did not exist. But we know that it's very common in North India. It's as common in North India as it is in the West. So that misperception is what we have to get rid of, actually. Once you're able to do that, the constellation of symptoms, it's something you have to think of. It's not common anymore that, the way they present. We used to think of short stature. Every short stature person was going to have celiac. It is not like that. So there's a lot of different symptoms. So you have to basically tease out the symptoms.
So what is the significance of the TTG test in the diagnosis of celiac disease, and is a biopsy necessary?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So a lot of doctors, what happens is they just use only the TTG, which is the antigen to the gluten. And TTG is something which is highly sensitive, but it's not highly specific. So just based on the TTG, you cannot diagnose anybody because there are what we call false positives. And that's the problem with that TTG. So that's why it's a very good screening tool. Once you get a screening tool, there's another blood test called the anti-endomysial antibody, which is more specific. The problem with it is it's more expensive. Now, there is a study out there which has shown that if your TTG is greater than 10 times, then possibility that you do not need a biopsy, but the gold standard is still the biopsy.
So when I was diagnosed with celiac disease, I was always confused, Definitely. What is the difference between gluten sensitivity and gluten intolerance and celiac disease?
Sure. So that's a very good question. And that goes back to the previous question about your TTG actually. With celiac disease, your TTG is going to be positive. And with gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance, what you're talking about is that you can have the same symptoms, but your TTG is going to be negative. So now what we know from 2012, there is certain other food materials that cause the same type of symptoms. So these food materials are called FODMAP, which are fermentable. They're sugars. They're basically carbohydrates, and they're found in everything. So it's about the digestion of those carbohydrates that causes the symptoms. Now, the problem is that wheat has those molecules in it, so it can cause the same thing. And I just want to ask you, you'd ask me in the...
Because I think there's always so many articles in the celiac world that there's no treatment as of for celiac disease, but do you feel there's any hope for vaccine development in future years to come for celiacs?
Yeah, I do. I actually am very hopeful because I think there's a lot of research going on, and especially in the US, where they're looking for not only vaccines, but also looking for medications where you can take the medication before you eat and then able to eat anything and everything, just like people with lactose intolerance, which can be a symptom of celiac.
So when I was diagnosed with celiac disease, after that, so what is the best way to keep a track of the recovery of your body once you go on a gluten-free diet? So I was told that I should have like the TTG test every 6 months, every monthly actually, and then go down to 6 months once my TTG numbers were kind of paralleled off.
Yeah, that's not the case actually. So, you know, the way when I had first started, what we did was we had started out doing the TTG maybe once in 6 months, and then if that was normal, we'd never look at it again unless you had symptoms. So basically, you have to look at symptomology, and this is why the endoscopy, the biopsy, is so important. Because if your biopsy is positive, then you truly have celiac. But if your biopsy is negative, but your TTG is positive, it doesn't necessarily mean you have active disease or actually true disease.
So what are your views on alternative treatments touted, like such as homeopathy? Because I've heard so many things about homeopathy from other friends in India specifically who've had celiac disease. Oh, it worked for me, but I never really tried it. But yeah, so what do you feel about that?
Well, I've had many patients whose parents were homeopathic doctors, and they've all told me one thing, that homeopathy has no medication. There is no cure. So all of these alternative therapies and treatments, they do not work. And it's basically about, at the moment, the only thing we have is to get rid of that gluten or the wheat in your diet, basically. It's avoidance.
So what are your views on food testing machines such as NEMA, who claim that the machines can test a piece of food for the presence of gluten? Do you feel that they're worth the investment?
Well, so yeah, I'm going to answer this in a couple of different ways, Annika. And the first way is I'm going to tell you that I believe in technology and I believe that it has a role to play. The question is going to be, are the machines accurate? So that's where all of the technology has to come in. The problem is going to be exactly what you said. Is it cost effective or is it going to be cost prohibitive? And for example, that NEMA product is actually very, very good because imagine you're out somewhere and you don't know where gluten-free diets are going to be. You don't know what restaurants have gluten-free diet. How are you going to know? So then those kind of machines actually are helpful. But the problem is that each cartridge in the machine, how the machine works is looking at how much of parts per million of gluten is in there. Permissible is 20. Anything above 20 is contaminated. It's not gluten-free. So this machine will tell you if it's 20 or less or 20 or above. So that is actually very useful. But the cartridge is cost prohibitive. And so that's where the economies have to come in with, technology, and all of this has to work together to be cost effective for everybody. And at the moment, it's not cost effective.
My final question for you today is, are there any precautions that can be taken against chronic illnesses and underlying health conditions that are kind of linked to celiac disease, that you might be iron deficient because of a lack of something in your diet and stuff like that we've heard quite a lot?
Well, no. So if you look at the pathophysiology of celiac disease, what happens is when you take the gluten or that gluten, you become, your own body is allergic to it. And so what happens is that it causes small little microscopic holes within the small intestine. So you don't absorb these things. As you don't absorb these things, that's how you become iron deficient. You become vitamin D or vitamin D deficient. You start to lose weight. You have the diarrhea and all of these symptoms. So once you remove the gluten from the diet, your body actually starts to heal itself. So there is other disorders that are associated with it because celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder. For example, thyroid, liver, diabetes, and then even ulcerative colitis. So every year, you as a patient have to get those testing for those diseases and not for the celiac disease per se. So that's getting a thyroid function test, that's getting a liver function test, that's getting a stool occult blood, which is looking for microscopic amounts of blood in the stool, and then getting a sugar test, just a simple sugar.
Thank you, Setty, for your insights. And now we're going to move on to questions by the participants.
My
So
pleasure.
Vishal has asked, is celiac disease genetic?
Yes, it is. There are a certain type of gene markers called the HLAs, and those are genetic. The problem in the West is that 30% of population already have these. And there are genetic testing for celiac disease, but they're not supposed to be done routinely. They don't play any role in that. And I'm sorry, can I say one more thing? So if you have a relative who has it, you have one in 10 chance there's another relative in the family. So for example, if you today as a child get diagnosed, your parents have to get tested. And whoever tests positive from that end, then that side of the family needs to get tested. And if you have siblings, you have to test the siblings. Now, when you do the test again, so before the age of 2, that TTG is not very accurate. So there are other blood testing that we can do.
Has asked, how can I check for gluten in medicines?
That's a very tricky thing because that's not something that is routinely made available to anybody. So I don't know the answer to that because I myself have had a hard time finding out which medications are gluten-free and which are not. So really, you have to look at the insert of the medication to see if gluten is listed on there as one of the ingredients.
Manish has asked, if I accidentally eat gluten, what should I do?
Nothing. So what happens is once it's ingested, there's nothing you can do. You just have to wait and see if you develop symptoms or not. And if you do, you know that it's that gluten. It'll work itself out if it's a small.
How do I deal with peer pressure in schools? I guess I could kind of answer that question.
Yeah.
So when I was diagnosed with celiac disease, it was at the start it was kind of a shock, but then your friends end up being really understanding, definitely your close group of friends, and you can kind of confide in them. And if you go to like a party or something and someone's having a pizza, then sometimes you can just bring your own one, or if you're really good friends with the person, you will be surprised at how willing people are to help accommodate your gluten-free lifestyle. So like when my friends have parties, they usually get me like a gluten-free cupcake. Also, they're very inclusive, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. But if someone is making fun of you for being celiac or having any food allergy for that matter, you should maybe just explain it to them, and you could maybe just tell them a bit about it, and people usually end up understanding and being quite supportive in the end.
Right. Anika, if I may ask you a question, did you find that there was a lot of problems as you were growing up with other children with celiac?
Absolutely not, because I actually had a really different experience to what my doctor who initially diagnosed me had told me, that you're going to have this and that's going to happen. But I did not face that at all. And I think it also just maybe depends on your friend group and the people you're surrounded by and how they support you. But as I said like earlier, if someone is being pressurizing, then you should just explain it to them, and people do end up understanding. So.
Right. The good thing about celiac is that there's no medication, so you don't have to keep taking any pills. And so what happens is then nobody will really know that you have celiac disease. You know, one day you might seem short, and then the other day, as it gets better, you seem to be gaining weight and looking healthier. So that's a positive.
He has asked, is there a relationship between lactose intolerance and gluten intolerance?
Well, so lactose intolerance can be a symptom of celiac disease. It's not necessary, and once you get rid of that gluten in the diet, that lactose intolerance will go away. So when we look at lactose intolerance, there's two types, primary and secondary. This is a secondary type of lactose intolerance. It's not permanent.
Adesh has asked, how seriously should one take cross-contamination? So I'm assuming in restaurants and when you're going to eat out.
Yeah, it's actually a very serious thing. It can be, you know, as little as the tawa that you're cooking the roti on. So if you put something with wheat and then you cook something which you're saying is wheat free, you know, you're using different atta, but on that same, that'll be contaminated. So it's a very serious thing, and it can happen very quickly without you even realizing.
Brinda has asked, can celiac disease be cured?
So there's no cure for celiac disease, unfortunately. We're not there yet. So, but what's happening is that it can be taken care of if you adhere to a strict diet, gluten-free diet.
Okay, someone has asked, how can we prevent celiac disease? Is there? So, yeah.
That's a hard question to answer. I don't think there is any way that you can prevent it. And so there's nothing in the literature anywhere about prevention for this. It's just that some people have that genetic makeup, and that's where the genetic HLA-DQs come in. Some people have it, some people do not. The question is, what's the trigger? What triggers that so that you develop the celiac? We don't know that yet.
So Richa has asked that her daughter was developing that didn't develop symptoms immediately, and she got kind of an infection every 2 months. That sounds really similar to what I went through.
Yeah.
And she says she's not ready to get a biopsy done. So how can she make sure if she's celiac?
Well, so the first thing is to do the TTG. You do a TTG IgA, total IgA, and then an anti-endomysial IgA. Now, what happens is with that IgA, which is an antibody, we know that 2 to 3% of all celiacs can be deficient in IgA, which is a protective antibody for the GI and the respiratory tract. So that's why you need to get the total IgA. So once the TTG comes back, and if the anti-endomysial is also high, then you know that probably she has true celiac disease.
Oh, this is a very interesting one. Someone has said that their daughter was detected with celiac disease when she was 5, and they stopped gluten. Then at age 11, after being given a gluten-free diet for 6 weeks, she had a biopsy and it was negative, but she's thin and hasn't gained much height except 1 growth spurt in 2 years. Please advise.
Yeah, so this is exactly the kind of question that you asked me earlier, and you have to look at that diagnosis and say, is this truly celiac disease or not? You know, could this be gluten sensitivity or intolerance? So where this is due to carbohydrates, and there's so much of cross-contamination from the food sources, and that's the reason. So it might be that she doesn't have celiac disease. Majority of the time, or I should say all the time, if you've been diagnosed properly, once you have celiac forever. There's no getting away from it.
So someone has asked, how do I handle travel while being gluten-free? I think that would be quite relevant to me as well, and then to you also after that. So when I travel, I use gluten-free cards that I found online. And I've also actually incorporated that into Gluten Free Jio, and I'm translating them all to different Indian languages with very specific to India. So you probably want to have kind of a little gluten-free checklist. So firstly, for flights, you always want to have a snack with you, because this has happened to me too many times where I've taken a risk and not taken many snacks, and then I haven't been given my gluten-free meal, even though I booked it, because it's just one meal that they have to prepare. So sometimes they forget, or whatever reason that they may have for that. So always have like gluten-free energy bars, which are really healthy and they're quite good as well. And when you're going to restaurants, always ask for the manager in a country. Do not trust the waiters, because it doesn't work out. The manager will always, even if they're not aware of celiac disease, definitely they'll be more attend to you better than a waiter would. And they usually end up going into the kitchen and sorting it out for you, which works really well. And sometimes it's best if you go to a country where your language isn't really, where English is not the first language, that you eat in your hotel, because they'll accommodate you much better than maybe if you go to like a street food restaurant. So yeah.
Yeah,
What would you
that's
say about
right.
that?
The other thing I think you have to ask is that when they're preparing these gluten-free, do they have separate utensils? Are they cleaning things separately, or is it the same way? So if they are, then truly it's not a gluten-free. There's going to be a lot of cross-contamination. So it's about awareness, exactly what you said. It's about awareness, knowing what foods have gluten in it, what do not have gluten in it, what can you eat and what you cannot eat. And then you have to look at the country you're in and look at it in that respect. What foods are available there?
She's asked, if I accidentally eat gluten, what should I do?
Yeah, so nothing. You can't do anything. There's no prevention for it. Once you eat it, you eat it. Depends on how much you've eaten. If it's one bite and then you say, oh, and then put it away, I don't think there'll be any issue. What can happen is you might get your symptoms back, sort of like abdominal pain, loose motion, or constipation, or something like that. But once you stop the gluten, those symptoms will go away. There's research going on in the US now where there are medications that if you take the medication, then you can have any gluten or anything. So those pills are still about 5 to 10 years away. They're undergoing testing at the moment, but they're not there in the market.
Shima has asked, can one get celiac disease suddenly, or do you always have it and the symptoms might show up late? So you might always have the gene, I'm guessing, and then.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So that's the whole point, is we don't know what the trigger is. So there is some trigger which says, okay, I have the genetic makeup, but why do I not have symptoms? Why do I develop the symptoms down the road? So that's the reason why the gene testing is not the right way to go.
We've got one last question. It's how do you advise on reading food labels? So what's the best method to kind of approach? Because if it doesn't have a certified, GF logo.
Yes. So I think it's about being aware yourself of what are the foods that can have it. You have to look at preservatives and colorings, because almost all the colorings that we put in food will have gluten in it. So you want to avoid those kind of things. So preservatives, coloring agents, those are the ones you want to really stay away from.
Thank you so much, Dr. Setty, for your insights.
My pleasure, Annika, and I wish you all the best. And thank you so much. I applaud you for this.
Thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us out of your busy schedule. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I think we've all learned a tremendous amount about celiac disease and are hopefully better informed about it. Whether you're a celiac yourself or are helping a loved one who has celiac, it is important to note that there's a community of others who are in the same boat, and that there are various resources and alternatives which allow you to live your best gluten-free life. Please do check out the work that we're doing at Gluten Free Jio, and check out my website, which is www.glutenfreejio.com, and keep your eyes peeled for our new app, which should be on the Play Store and App Store very soon. Thank you so much, Dr. Setty, and thank you everyone for listening. Goodbye.